Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I do hope you're doing exceedingly well. Loads and loads of love to each and every one of you, and thank you so much for getting back to me on all the things that you tend to drink. It's incredible how many incredible beverages everybody enjoys. So whatever it is, go and get it, whether it's beer, whether it's Irish coffee, just go and get it because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Bob and I grew up in North America in the early 70s, but I would prefer not to give the geographical coordinates of where that was for obvious reasons. Growing up, my family consisted of both my parents and my young brother Malcolm. We resided in a quaint 1700s charming cottage with whitewashed brick walls and large sash windows and a rather unique crooked chimney that was situated on a couple of acres of land. We lived in a countrified, rather remote area, surrounded by acres of dreamy forest, horse riding trails, mountainous valleys, flowery meadows and plenty of farms, with the added advantage of being only about 15 minutes away from the main town. As a young boy, the town was a great spot to meet up with all my friends, where we would eat ice creams at the local parlour or spend much time playing at the park. As far as any small town goes, we had our fair share of quirky, eccentric characters living among us, some that we loved to hate, most particularly the very elegantly attired unmarried Miss Maggie Peterson, otherwise known as the Magpie, for a very good reason, of course, that was only known by the locals at the time. The pencil-thin Miss Peterson was in her early 70s and was glamorous with long brown shoulder-length hair and a peachy skin that was in remarkably good condition for a woman of her advancing years. Rest assured, you would never ever find Miss Peterson dressed in anything other than star-studded party frocks that were more suited for a fancy evening at the opera than hanging around our small town or roughing it in the countryside. Everything in that woman's wardrobe was ostentatious and sparkly. She would often wear swanky and glossy gold or silver dresses, or clothes adorned with hundreds of sparkling fake diamonds or diamante crystals. Never a day in my life did I ever see that woman wear anything drab or mundane, and I'm almost certain that she only ever shopped in the glamorous evening sections of department stores. I think the harmless, gentle Miss Peterson thoroughly enjoyed putting her unscrupulous nose into everybody's business, but not quite in the way that you might imagine. Much like an investigative reporter or a foxy private eye, the tactile Miss Peterson was a hands-on sort of person. She was the kind of discerning character that would know exactly what outfit you took to the dry cleaners for cleaning, or how much you spent on your weekly shop that week, or what grade your kid got for the school math test. But she would find these things out by surreptitiously reading your school reports lying around your home, or stuffed bills that were scrunched up in a jacket pocket. It was weird because she filled her mind with nonsensical trivia that was so meaningless and inconsequential, but to Miss Peterson it was fascinating. On reflection, I think that she found people's lives and ritzy glamorous clothes all incredibly alluring. If she visited your home, she would always open your fridge to examine the contents with her beady eyes, making a mental note of the type of mayonnaise you purchased or what your favourite brand of yogurt was, as all these little details about your life were a source of great intrigue for the likes of Miss Peterson. Another curious anomaly is that she visited the townsfolk with social, impromptu surprise calls that invariably almost always meant she arrived at the most inconvenient time, which many folk believed was intentional and deliberate on her part, almost to catch you off guard. She would arrive at your place while you were running around like a bat out of hell, or were in the middle of taking a much-needed shower. Those were the times that I would hear my mother screaming, "That dreadful woman! Why won't she leave us alone? Why does she have to arrive on the scene when I have 101 things to do?" Miss Peterson would assure you that while you were picking your kids up from school, she would stay and hang around at your home and entertain herself until you got back, and she meant every word of it. I can assure you that from the moment your back was turned, you can be sure she got to work on raiding through all your stuff in a frenzied excitement, and trying on any of your clothes that sparkled or were glitzy in any way. Yet despite her fervent passion and curiosity, Miss Peterson was honest, candid, forthright and incorruptible, and she would never have borrowed something from you without asking first, but that was where the boundaries began and ended for her. If she arrived at your house for tea, she would always insist on taking a much-needed trip to the ladies, and on the way there she would mischievously ferret around in all the bedrooms, having a jolly good snoop around, and if she got caught in the process, she would pretend she had lost her way, even though you had distinctly told her that the ladies was under the staircase. "Oh, I didn't hear you," she would say. "I thought you said it was on top of the stairs." It was common to find her 3 floors up in your home, presumptuously rummaging and meddling through your stuff, rather like an exuberant vagrant at a jumble sale. One of my mother's neighbours found her in the upstairs bedroom once, trying on one of her glamorous pink gold evening gowns with a rather dashing fluffy pink scarf to match, which she had placed on over her clothes, and was seen admiring her reflection in the long cupboard mirror. Upon seeing our neighbour standing in the doorway of her bedroom, staring at her in astonishment with "What the heck are you doing?" kind of expression written on her face, Mrs. Peterson would promptly pull off the dress and scarf and replace them into the bewildered neighbour's hands, as if she'd been at a cubicle at a clothing store and was rejecting the items. "Not very nice," she had said, referring to the clothes. "Much too brassy for my liking, I'm afraid." And then she'd look directly at our neighbour, squarely in the eyes, as if nothing had transpired, and said, "Where did you say the ladies' cloakroom was? I completely forgot." She would give herself away by saying to me, "Bobby, how long have you been playing the flute? And how old is your hamster?" I assure you, there is no way she could have known these personal details about me without having snooped in my bedroom to begin with, as my flute was locked away in my cupboard, and my hamster was hidden in the far corner of the bedroom during the day, and his cage was always covered with a towel when he was sleeping. You pretty much knew if Miss Peterson was coming around, because she'd invariably go officiously prying, so you better had nothing to hide. Mrs. Peterson generously offered her services for babysitting completely free of charge to any of the townsfolk, possibly as an excuse to go ferreting around when unsuspecting backs were invariably turned. Many people claimed that after she'd been babysitting for them, even their mail had been tampered with, and any glamorous clothes with a hint of a sparkle were left hanging on the hangers inside out, looking ominously like they'd been tried on. Miss Peterson enjoyed trying any glitzy clothes on, or anything that sparkled, gleamed, shone, or glittered, which included people's jewellery, which was why she earned the name the Magpie by the folk in our town, as magpies are duly noted for picking up glitzy things and placing them in their nests, as just like Miss Peterson, they have an eye for anything shiny. My parents didn't really care if Miss Peterson snooped through their stuff when she visited our home, as they were pretty laid-back and easy-going sort of people at the very best of times, who pretty much wore their heart on their sleeves. And as for secrets, they didn't have any. In those days, hiring a babysitter for free was something not to be sneezed at, and so invariably Miss Peterson spent many a long night watching over us as little children, while my parents went out painting the town red. I rather liked Miss Peterson because despite all else she was kind and caring. When Malcolm and I were little, she would tuck us up into bed and read us a bedtime story. Then later on in the evening we would hear her surfing, rustling and rattling around through drawers and examining all our family stuff and looking through old family photographs. My brother and I would giggle to ourselves as we thought it terribly funny that Miss Peterson was such a big snoop. We knew she'd be trying on my mother's evening wear by now, or possibly reading her private diary, which was exceedingly boring, as my mother would write things in her diary like, "Pretty mundane day, rained a lot, cooked chicken hot pot roast for lunch, and visited Mum's grave." My brother Malcolm used to joke that Miss Peterson's nose would grow so long as a result of all her snooping, and the irony of ironies is that this glamorous woman with her dark chocolate beady eyes really did have a somewhat pointed beak-like nose, which I thought was very befitting for a woman known as the Magpie, which I really thought suited her down to a T. One evening after Miss Peterson had tucked us up into bed and read us our favourite bedtime story about a very happy little hippo called Wally. Then she kissed us on the cheeks good night and switched off the bedroom lights, leaving the door ever so slightly ajar. I smiled secretly to myself in amusement as I pulled the sheets over my face. She could be heard rummaging through all our family stuff, surreptitiously trying to be very quiet, to conceal her sneaking activities, but with very little success. All of a sudden I could hear Miss Peterson let out a huge, terrified scream. I sat upright in my bed and thought, did I hear that, or was I dreaming? I had been drifting off to sleep, and it was very difficult to distinguish reality from fiction. I could have sworn I'd heard her scream, but was I imagining it? I sensed something felt really off. I felt like I was gripped with a growing sense of unease. I could hear what I can only describe as a frenzied Miss Peterson charging around the house frantically, rather like a bull in a china shop, and opening up cupboards in a haste, banging doors behind her loudly. She seemed noisier than usual, almost as if she was not even attempting to cover up her insatiable curiosity. That wasn't like her at all. It was in that second I sensed something untoward was going on, and so in my pyjamas I ventured out of my bedroom. I could see Miss Peterson hurriedly bolting down the staircase in a sparkling evening gown of my mother's, wearing high-heeled silver slippers, carrying my father's hunting rifle in her hands, and dashing out of the side door as if she was in hot pursuit of something, but what she was after I couldn't imagine. What on earth was she doing, I wondered? It seemed like her behaviour was unusually odd this evening. I quickly followed her with a growing sense of intrigue. Perhaps this nosiness lark that had consumed Miss Peterson's life was seriously infectious, and I had caught it, because now I was growing increasingly curious myself. "Go away! Shoo!" I could hear Miss Peterson shouting. "Go away! Go away, you creep! Get away! Leave!" It was almost as if she was telling a strange dog to get off the property. All of a sudden she began firing some random shots after the mystery creature with my father's rifle, and that was when I saw this huge, dark, shadowy silhouette thundering towards her like a bull charging a red flag at a bullfight. And the red flag in this scenario was no other than Miss Peterson herself, who was now screaming at the top of her lungs, "Help! Help! Please help! Help!" Whatever on earth this creature was, it appeared to be enraged and maddened. I got the distinct impression that Miss Peterson's random shooting had provoked and inflamed the situation, only making it 1,000 times worse, rather like putting petrol on a fire that was dying out anyway, and reigniting and aerating the flames, turning them into an outrageous, wrathful inferno. Everything was happening so quickly, as it invariably always does in any violent scenario, when your life flashes before you, and things take forever to unfold, when in reality what seems to last a lifetime has only been a matter of seconds, but your recall is so vividly pronounced that it is indelibly marked on your memory with such crystal clear clarity. And this is what this moment was like for me, only I was the spectator of this event rather than the victim. So for me it was tantamount to watching a movie. I remember thinking in those memorable seconds, what on earth is this extraordinary creature? I've never seen anything like it before. It ran towards Miss Peterson, its overlong arms swinging vigorously backwards and forwards, and it seemed prepped for a fight, rather like a warrior on a battlefield. This virile, Herculean creature was the size of a great giant. It was easily as tall and as wide as our front door, with such huge, powerful legs and a funny-shaped arched head. Despite some of its unusual features of this able-bodied creature, in my opinion, it did appear to possess a rather remarkable human-like profile, along with a man's face, but it was covered from head to toe with long flowing dark hair. And it smelt like petrichor, which is that earthly scent you smell after the rain falls on the soil. I actually really love that smell. As it lunged boldly and fearlessly towards Miss Peterson, it grabbed my father's rifle from her hands and bent it effortlessly backwards like some people can bend spoons with their minds. It was almost like the rifle was soft and pliable for him, much like plasticine. It threw the twisted metal into the bushes, where it disappeared into the long grass and was visibly no longer seen. Then it grabbed Miss Peterson, who was now screaming, tossing her over his gargantuan shoulders like a sack of potatoes, where I could see her tiny body wiggling wildly and her skinny legs kicking desperately to escape the critter's clutches, but his unassailable strong hands had held her down on his strapping rock-hard shoulders. They were so powerful. I knew she would never be able to escape his forceful grip, for this creature was impregnable, robust and invulnerable. In that second I was so frozen in shock that I just stared at these inopportune proceedings evolving before my very eyes, feeling almost certain that I would never ever lay my eyes on Miss Peterson again, and that she was either in the process of being kidnapped or would end up as a tasty meal for this monstrous beast. I couldn't decide what was the most likely scenario, but either way you looked at it, things were not looking favourable as far as Miss Peterson was concerned, and I was pretty certain that she was a goner at the very least. While all this was transpiring, I could hear Miss Peterson shouting, "Put me down! Put me down! Put me down!" And then her voice branched out into a series of desperate helps that sounded ominously like a yapping dog, followed by some muffled, high-pitched screams. The critter glided with her towards the old oak tree in our yard. For a second he stood very still, and hurled the frightened woman up and down in the air, exactly like a ball, catching her in his hands every time. I truly think he skillfully incorporated these cunning scare tactics in his artful manoeuvres against the poor woman to maximise her terror, and it was clearly working, for indeed Miss Peterson was so petrified that by this time she was frozen solid in fear, and uttered not a word, seemingly resigned to her inevitable fate or demise. I must confess she looked as frail, fragile, delicate and pathetic as a Barbie doll in this creature's burly arms and sizable hands. Finally he chucked her on the ground, discarding her body under the oak tree, like a piece of rejected and fallacious litter, where it rolled backwards precariously until it stopped and settled yards away from the large, voluptuous tree trunk. The critter then snorted in absolute disgust, gliding away, jumping over the white wicker fence with the ease of a horse, and disappearing into the trees until it was gone from our sight, moving with a graceful agility that was seamless. For a second it was hard to process what I'd observed, as it seemed far too incredulous to be real. I think I was too bewildered and dumbfounded to even be remotely scared as I should have been, for fear can easily be hijacked by complete, total and utter astonishment, as was the case with me. In haste, I bravely bolted towards poor Miss Peterson, and began to valiantly shake her body to make sure that she wasn't dead. In truth, I feared the worst, but hoped for the best. "Miss Peterson! Miss Peterson! Miss Peterson, are you all right?" The woman opened her eyes, and on seeing me peering over at her, began to scream and fight me back with her hands, thrashing me violently. "Go away! Go away! Go away!" she shrieked. "Miss Peterson! Miss Peterson! It's all right! It's only me!" It took a while for Miss Peterson to come around and compose herself, and once she had seemingly calmed down, she sat bolt upright and looked directly at me. "Oh, it's you, Bobby," she said. "It's you. What happened?" "I think you know more about that, Miss Peterson, than I do," I said, reaching out with my hand to help her rise up from the ground, back onto her feet. And I was relieved to see that the willowy, sylph-like woman was walking with a little bit of a hobble, but was no worse for wear, as clearly nothing was broken, but she held on to my shoulders for support as we returned to the house. I led Miss Peterson to our kitchen and immediately put on the kettle, as my mother had taught me that when you've had a shock of any kind, nothing beats a cup of sweet hot tea, and at 10 years old I knew my way around the kitchen exceedingly well, and was a dab hand with making tea and offering tons of chocolate biscuits to our guests. I watched Miss Peterson sitting down on the kitchen chair, staring vacantly into space, while I prepared the tea for us. I could discern her face was as white as a sheet, and her eyes were as wide as saucers, and I could see that she was shivering like you do when you're very cold, and so I went to fetch a blanket for her, which I threw over her shoulders, and which she wrapped around her body gratefully. I handed Miss Peterson the sweet tea, which I'd loaded with 10 full teaspoons of sugar, as I figured the sweeter the better. Miss Peterson's arthritic hands were shaking, and when she held the teacup, her fingers wobbled precariously, and the tea in her cup began to move around like the waves of a tempestuous sea. "Did you see it, Bobby?" Miss Peterson asked me, studying me curiously with rounded, alarmed-looking arms. "Yes, I did," I admitted. "What was it, Miss Peterson?" I asked. "A monster! A demon! A creature from the very depths of hell," she said, looking at me earnestly. That thing! It nearly killed me. You saw it throwing me up in the air, didn't you? Like a rag doll." She grabbed my hand suddenly. Bobby, I nearly died tonight," she said. "What happened, Miss Peterson?" I asked, watching her draining the teacup in one large mouthful, which must have tasted as sickly as sugar syrup, but Miss Peterson did not seem to mind. "Nice tea, Bobby," she said. "Your mother has taught you well." I could see that the colour had returned to Miss Peterson's cheeks, and even her fingers had stopped shaking. It was only then that I noticed that Mrs. Peterson was wearing my mother's favourite dress, that was now completely ripped down the middle, and was brand new. I knew she was excited about wearing the pretty dress to a friend's wedding, and Miss Peterson had completely ruined it for her. And when my mother found out about this, she would be less than amused. But I knew better than to say anything, as Miss Peterson was very sensitive right now. "Bobby, I was in your parents' bedroom," she said. "The light was fully on. You know, dear, when you're out in the yard, that if the light's on in any room in the cottage, you can see everything that's going on in the house from the outside. I'd failed to pull the curtains, I'm afraid. Now there's a tree very close to your parents' bedroom window, and I was trying on your mother's pretty dress and examining myself in the mirror when I sensed that I was being watched by something. It was a creepy, insidious feeling that sent horrible chills down my spine. But how could anybody be watching me, as I was alone in your parents' bedroom? Yet I could feel eyes staring at me. And then I looked towards the window, and I hadn't drawn those curtains, and that was when I saw it. It was the most massive creature standing there on a very large tree branch, watching me like a perverse peeping Tom. But whatever this thing was, it was not entirely human. And its face, it scared the hell out of me. It was like a monster, big, wide and hairy, but a face that was so human, it was almost unnerving. "Was it being aggressive towards you?" I asked. "No, but it was staring at me, Bobby. It was spying on me. I felt aggrieved and offended by its impudent behaviour. It just didn't stop staring." "Well, maybe it was admiring how pretty you look in my mother's dress," I suggested. "Bobby, I don't care if it was admiring me. The thing was watching me, like a peeping Tom. It was staring." "Were you afraid?" I asked. "Well, it gave me one hell of a scare, Bobby, spying on me like that. But I didn't know what it was, and I couldn't see it too clearly, but I wanted it gone." "So you went looking for my father's rifle and went chasing after it. How did you manage to open my dad's gun cabinet in the first place? He keeps it locked to prevent accidents, and he hides the key." "Well, I know where your father keeps his key," said Miss Peterson. "He tapes it to the bottom of his desk in his study." I was exceedingly impressed, as even I didn't know where my dad kept the keys to his gun cabinet. "You're a genius," I said. "You're a super sleuth. I'd never look there for a key." When my parents got back to the house, and my mother saw every light on in the cottage, and Miss Peterson and I sitting at the kitchen table having tea at about 1 o'clock in the morning, she was far from pleased. Worse still, when she saw Miss Peterson was covered in mud and had ripped her brand new best dress to pieces, she was less than amused. "What's going on here?" she screamed. "And why is Bobby up, Miss Peterson? You know that my boys should be in bed by 8:30 sharp. You know the rules." "Your son has been a saint tonight," Miss Peterson said. "You should be proud of him. He rescued me from the beast." "What beast?" asked my mother, looking appalled. "You're not making any sense, Miss Peterson. Have you been drinking?" "Of course not," said Mrs. Peterson, looking indignant. "You know I never touch the stuff." "Well, I sincerely hope not," said my mother, eyeing her ever so suspiciously. "Because I can't have anyone watching over my boys, if they're surreptitiously drinking behind my back. Do you understand? I'm sorry, Mrs. Peterson, but you do sound inebriated and intoxicated. Can you categorically assure me that you haven't been drinking tonight? She's not drunk, Mummy, I protested. She's just had a terrible shock, that's all. A shock? Said my mother. What kind of a shock? Did someone break in? Should I be calling the sheriff? You're beginning to scare me. Nothing like that, I assured my mother. There was a peeping Tom spying on Miss Peterson when she was trying on your dress in your bedroom. A peeping Tom? Said my mother, looking aghast. You mean a stranger was staring at you getting dressed in the middle of the night, of all things? Who is this vile man? We must report him to the sheriff at once. How did he manage to look into the bedroom? It's on the second floor, for goodness sake. He was standing on the branch of the large walnut tree outside your bedroom window, looking in at me, said Miss Peterson. He was pressing his face right against the window. His head was huge. My mother quickly opened her handbag and grabbed out a pen and paper. Give me a detailed description. What did he look like? I'll pass it on to the sheriff pronto. The man must be caught immediately, because this could happen again, and the last thing we need is a peeping Tom in this area. I think he was about 7 foot tall and 3 foot wide at the shoulder area. He was covered in hair from head to foot, with the exception of his face. His face looked a lot like your husband's, actually. Masculine and rugged, said Miss Peterson, suddenly giggling inappropriately. Miss Peterson, you are drunk, said my mother, throwing down the pen in exasperation. I'm not going to listen to all this nonsense. 7 foot, 3 foot wide. What on earth are you talking about? Covered in hair and looking like my husband? More to the point, why are you wearing my brand new dress that you've ripped to shreds? And why were you dressing in my room in the first place? That's what I want to know. It was so pretty, said Miss Peterson. I had to try it on. It's a lovely dress. Not any more. I'm sorry. Do you have any idea how expensive it was, Miss Peterson? Said my mother. I was going to wear it to my best friend's wedding, and now, thanks to you, it's completely ruined. All of a sudden, my dad entered the room with a grim, solemn look on his face. Someone has ransacked my rifle cabinet, and my high-powered rifle is missing, he said. It was very expensive, and it's gone. Mrs. Peterson took your rifle, Dad, to run after the beast, but the creature bent it backwards and threw it into the bushes near the oak tree before it actually attacked her. How did you manage to open my cabinet, Miss Peterson? Asked my father, looking bemused. She's a super sleuth, Dad, I piped proudly. She knows exactly where you keep your key hidden, right there under the desk. Lovely, said my father, exiting the room and venturing out of doors to search for his rifle. You've some explaining to do, Miss Peterson, said my mother. Why are you making up all these crazy, preposterous stories about beasts? And what are you filling my son's head with? You're making him believe all this crazy stuff. Because what she's telling you is true, Mum, I insisted. Why would we lie to you? Miss Peterson is lucky to be alive tonight, because I saw the beast too, and it did throw her up in the air like a ball and offloaded her near the tree there. And I'm not making any of this up. I don't know what it was, but it was like a giant human being with lots of long flowing hair, and we're telling you the truth. My father entered the room very silently, carrying his bent rifle. The expression on his face was astonished. Sweetheart, I don't know what attacked Miss Peterson tonight, but I'm inclined to believe her story. No normal creature could have bent my rifle back like this. This is extraordinary. Whatever did this was incredibly strong, and it clearly was not of a human source, because no human could possibly do this. My mother looked astonished as she took my father's rifle from him and examined it, her eyes growing as round as saucers, and her jaw dropping to the ground. Oh, my goodness! Who could have done this? This is incredible! Exactly my point, said my father. Something happened here tonight, but what? I cannot imagine. A week or so after that incident, my mother received a parcel in the post. and it was a beautiful dress from Miss Peterson, far more exquisite than my mother's original dress, with a note which read, "I'm really sorry for messing up your dress. I hope this will be a good enough replacement for you." My mother was well and truly humbled, because even though Miss Peterson was a nosy person with a passion for all things glitzy, she didn't have a mean bone in her entire body. "She shouldn't have done this," said my mother. "This is the most incredible dress I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it probably cost her a fortune. I probably already owe Miss Peterson dozens of dresses already for all the free babysitting she's done for us over the years. I do feel heartily ashamed of myself." It was about 6 months after that strange erroneous event, when my father was taking out the rubbish at night, when he stopped dead in his tracks. As watching him from the tree line was a creature that fit the description of the one that Miss Peterson and I had seen that night. My father was astounded by the dark silhouette he saw, and described the creature as benevolent and rather curious. It watched him for a while, and then turned around and glided away. He never saw it in detail, but did determine that it probably was the same creature. Looking back all these years later, I'm in no doubt that the creature that attacked Miss Peterson was a Bigfoot, but I believe he never intended to harm her, for if indeed that had been the case, it would have been nothing for him to finish her off with a single blow of his hand. I believe the Bigfoot noticed the lights in our family cottage and could see activity going on in my mother's bedroom, and was inquisitive and curious, so he climbed up the tree to have a better look, pressing his face against the glass pane, obviously scaring Miss Peterson to death. Another thing to bear in mind was that Miss Peterson was trying on a very glitzy gold sparkling dress, which must have been shimmering, and that in itself would have been very eye-catching for the creature. I think the creature was curious and intrigued by Miss Peterson, and possibly even had a soft spot for women, who knows? I imagine when she started firing after him with a rifle, he took offence to her actions, and sought revenge by tossing her in the air a few times to scare her, like she had invariably done to him, by firing after him like that, which was a grievous mistake on her part to make. So, with the exception of my father's encounter with the Bigfoot, we've never really been fortunate enough to have another encounter at our home, but I'm still hoping. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a fabulous story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.